Reuben fell right between the rows of corn on Friday, August 27th, as the sun was setting and the cobs were ready to be picked. I was carrying him a thermos of iced tea. He always asked for a drink at this time of day, when the heat was beginning to subside but work was getting easier. I saw him lying on his side, face in the ground, his right hand convulsively clutching a lump of earth. His heart stopped instantly, Dr. Ernesto said later. At 55, no warning, no agony. Just picked up and died in the midst of the corn we'd planted together every spring for 30 years straight. Reuben always said he would die on his own land, but I thought it wouldn't be soon, that we'd still have time to grow old together, to sit on the porch, to have grandchildren. But there were no grandchildren. Damien and Esteban had just gotten married, the older one 2 years ago to Yvette, the younger one 6 months ago to Narita. Both girls from the city, both college-educated, both looked at our farm as something temporary until their husbands found better jobs. When I screamed, asking for help, Damien was the first to come running. He was working in the far field, checking on the condition of the beans. Esteban was in town, at the farm supply store where he moonlighted as manager. The three of us tried to bring Reuben to his senses, massaging his chest, performing CPR, but it was too late. His eyes stared blankly into the sky and his lips were blue. Dr. Ernesto arrived 40 minutes later. There is only one hospital in our town and only 2 doctors for the whole district. He pronounced him dead, wrote a certificate, sympathized. He said that men in our family are not known for their strong hearts. Reuben's father also died of a heart attack at the age of 52. I sat by my husband's body until the funeral home arrived. Damien tried to take me inside, but I didn't want to leave Reuben alone. I felt like if I moved away, he'd completely disappear. As long as I was there, he still existed, lying among his fields, under a familiar sky. The funeral workers, 2 grim men in black suits, didn't show up until evening. They loaded the body into a hearse and drove it into town to prepare for the funeral. I didn't sleep that night. I walked around the house, cleaning, preparing food for the guests who would come tomorrow to pay their respects. Damien stayed the night. He brought Yvette and they took the guest bedroom. All night I could hear them whispering, discussing something important. In the morning, I realized what it was. "Mom, we need to talk," Damien said over breakfast. "About the funeral, about what's going to happen next." Yvette sat next to him, carefully eating her scrambled eggs and occasionally nodding to her husband. She was wearing a black dress, which she must have bought especially for the occasion. I'd never seen her in black. "We think it would be better to have a modest funeral," Damien went on. "Papa didn't like pomp, just a funeral service in the church and a wake at home." "Of course," I agreed. That was the plan. "And," Yvette added, "we need to think about the future, about how life is going to work now." I didn't understand what she meant. What future? What life? "Reuben died yesterday, and they're already making plans." "Not now." Damien stopped his wife. "First the funeral." Esteban arrived for lunch with Narita. The younger son looked confused. He was always more emotional than his older brother. Narita was also in black, but it looked more natural on her. She worked as a hairdresser and was used to different styles of dress. "Mom, how are you?" Esteban hugged me, and I felt him shaking. "I can't believe Dad's gone." "It's going to be okay," Narita said, hugging me too. "We're here for you, we'll help." She was sincere, that girl. Unlike Yvette, who always kept her distance, Narita tried to be part of the family. True, her ideas about rural life were rather naive. She thought farming was something romantic, close to nature and organic products. The day passed in a hectic pace. Neighbors brought food, flowers, expressed condolences. Father Miguel from San Miguel Church arrived, and details of the memorial service were discussed. Reuben's brothers from a neighboring state arrived, Uncle Pablo and his family and Uncle Carlos and his wife. They stayed at our house and occupied the remaining bedrooms. In the evening, when everyone was settled in, I stayed in the kitchen with Paloma. My best friend had rushed over as soon as she learned of Reuben's death. Paloma worked as a cook at the local soup kitchen and knew how to cook for a large number of people. She took it upon herself to organize the food for the wake. "How are you holding up?" she asked, chopping vegetables for the salad. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I haven't gotten it yet." It's all kind of unreal. It's normal. Grief comes gradually. We worked in silence. Paloma peeled potatoes. I did the dishes. The familiar movements were soothing. Outside the kitchen window, we could see the fields, the corn rows lost in the dusk. Tomorrow, they would have to continue to be cleaned. Life would not stop because of the death of one person, even if that person was the center of everything. "How are the boys?" Paloma asked. "In different ways. Damien is hanging in there. Esteban is more worried. And their wives?" I shrugged. Yvette acted correct but detached. Narita seemed more involved, but I knew it wouldn't last long. As soon as the funeral was over, both would return to their city lives. "Will you be living alone?" Paloma asked the question I was trying not to think about. "I guess it's a big house, but I'm used to it. And the household? The boys will take care of it. Damien is good at farming and Esteban can do sales." Paloma nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She had known our sons since childhood and understood their personalities better than anyone else. The funeral was quiet. Ruben didn't like pageantry, so I arranged it the way he would have wanted it. A simple wooden coffin, a service in the little church of San Miguel, where we had been married 32 years before. Father Miguel spoke a sermon about how death is not the end, but a passage to a better world. I listened and tried to believe it. 40 people came, neighboring farmers, buyers of our produce, old friends, Señor Martinez, who had been buying beans from us for 10 years, Don Cortez, our first big customer, Gerardo Morales, who was sometimes late with payment, but always paid with interest. They all came up to me, shook my hand, said Ruben was a good man and an honest partner. Yvette and Narita looked out of place in their black dresses from famous designers, but they held themselves with dignity. They didn't know most of the people who came and stood a little apart, occasionally nodding to familiar faces. The wake was held at home, on the veranda. Paloma prepared the traditional dishes, tamales, mole, rice, and beans. The guests sat at long tables drinking tequila, remembering Ruben. They told stories about how he helped his neighbors during the drought, how he fairly resolved disputes between farmers, how he never cheated in trade matters. "Ruben was a man of his word," Don Cortez said. "If he promised something, there was no doubt about it." "And his grain was always good quality," Martinez added. "He never failed." As I listened to these conversations, I realized that people would miss not only Ruben the man, but also Ruben the partner. Our farm was part of the local economy, and his death would disrupt many familiar ties. By evening, the guests had dispersed. Only the immediate family remained, Ruben's brothers and our sons and their wives. We sat in the living room drinking coffee and talking about various things. Uncle Pablo talked about his ranch, Uncle Carlos about working on the railroad, just the kind of family talk that helps you get over grief. "Well, nephews," Uncle Pablo said, turning to Damien and Esteban, "you are the owners now. It's a big responsibility." "We'll manage," Damien replied. "Dad has prepared us well. And Amelia will help," Uncle Carlos added. "She knows the household as well as her brother." "Of course," Esteban agreed. "Mom has always been Dad's right hand." Yvette and Narita looked at each other but didn't say anything. I noticed the look and knew they had other plans. The next day, Ruben's brothers went home. The house was empty, seeming even bigger. Damien and Esteban stayed behind. Practical matters had to be dealt with. The first thing we did was go to the notary, Don Alberto Santos, a small, gaunt man with a thin mustache who had been handling our family's affairs for 20 years. His office was in an old building in the center of town, on the second floor above the pharmacy. Ruben had written his will 5 years ago, after my nephew was born, and I knew its contents. We'd discussed it more than once, all the land he'd left to his sons equally, and I'd get the house and a small amount of money for my old age. The notary's office was stuffy and smelled of old paper. Don Alberto pulled a thick folder of documents from the safe. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said solemnly. Ruben was a good man and a responsible client. We sat down in the chairs in front of his desk. Yvette was wearing a strict gray suit. She worked at the city bank as a teller and was used to looking formal. Narita preferred jeans and a white blouse. Hairdressers could afford a looser style. Both listened attentively, occasionally glancing at each other. According to the last will of the late Ruben Cordero, Don Alberto read slowly, by syllables, because without glasses badly saw and glasses constantly lost, all real estate, including land with a total area of 230 hectares, farm buildings, agricultural equipment, and livestock, passes in equal shares to the sons Damian Ruben Cordero and Esteban Ruben Cordero. The boys sat side by side, holding their wives' hands. Damian looked serious and focused, Esteban a little confused. They realized they were receiving a great responsibility. Amelia's wife, Rosario Cordero, would be given a residential house with a 1-hectare plot of land for life, as well as a sum of 50,000 pesos. That's what I expected. Ruben had always said that the land should be left to the men. They were stronger, they could work it. A house and a little money would be enough for me. But now, sitting in the stuffy notary's office, I thought for the first time about what that decision meant in practice. For 30 years, I'd handled the farm's finances. I knew every customer by sight, remembered who paid on time, and who procrastinated until the last minute. Drawing up contracts, calculating profits, planning next year's crops. Ruben was well versed in agricultural techniques. He knew when to plant, when to water, when to harvest. But the numbers bored him. The paperwork annoyed him. He used to say, "Amelia, you're my head, and I'm the hands." "Are there any questions about the will?" Don Alberto took off his glasses and wiped them with his handkerchief. "No," Damian answered. "Everything is clear." "Mom, don't worry," Esteban added. "We'll work things out. No one will leave you." Yvette leaned toward her husband and whispered something in his ear. Damian nodded. "Of course, Mom, you'll stay in the house and rest. Esteban and I will do the chores ourselves." Narita gave me a strained smile. "Amelia, you've worked so hard for so many years, now you deserve to rest. The girls from my salon always say that you should spend more time on yourself, on beauty, on health." We left the notary in complete silence. It was hot outside, 38 degrees in the shade, and I wanted to get home under the air conditioner as soon as possible. We drove in Damian's car, an old Nissan Sentra he'd bought on credit 2 years ago. Yvette sat in the front seat flipping through a magazine, Narita next to me studying her fingernails. The sons were discussing what needed to be done first. "We have to finish harvesting the corn," Esteban said, "and make a deal with Martinez to sell it." "Martinez doesn't pay much," I intervened. "It is better to contact Gerardo Morales. He gives a good price for quality grain." "Mom, we'll figure it out on our own," Damian said. "You don't need to think about it anymore." Yvette turned around. "Amelia, you're already tired of all these worries. It's time to hand things over to the young ones. Damian is very responsible. He can handle it." "Of course he will," Narita said. "And Esteban is my golden boy. He's so smart. Everyone in the store praises him. They say he is the best salesman. I did not say anything. Damian really responsible. He never shirked work, always helped his father. But he didn't know the business. He didn't sign contracts, didn't deal with buyers, didn't set prices. Esteban had only worked in the store for 6 months, and before that he had been idle until Ruben got him a job there through an acquaintance. At home, we sat on the veranda and drank cold lemonade. Yvette took out a notebook and a pen. She was always organized, liked to make lists and plans. "We need to make a plan," she announced. "Divide up responsibilities, prioritize." "I'll do the equipment and field work," Damian said. "Esteban will do sales and purchasing." "And I'll help with the paperwork," Yvette added. "At the bank, I'm used to paperwork, to working with numbers." "And I'll help," Narita interjected. "I have a lot of customers. Maybe someone will want to buy our products, or recommend us to someone they know." They spoke as if I no longer existed, as if my 30 years of experience were suddenly unnecessary. I sat and listened to them share what Ruben and I had spent a lifetime building. What about the regular customers? I couldn't take it anymore. Martinez, for example, is very capricious. He requires the grain to be of a certain moisture content, no more than 14%, and the packaging must be special, in bags of 50 kilograms, no more, and Cortez always wants a discount, but he pays in cash, which is very convenient. "Mom, we'll figure it out," Damian repeated. "Don't worry about us." "Amelia," Yvette said in that tone of voice that one usually uses to explain things to children. We understand that you're worried, but right now you need to rest, to recover from your loss. In the meantime, we'll take care of things. Yes, Narita nodded. And then, times have changed. Everything is done differently now, through the internet, through mobile applications. It's easier for young people to understand. What mobile applications? I was surprised. Martinez doesn't even know how to use a cell phone yet. Not all clients are so backward, Yvette said. You have to look for progressive partners. In the evening, when they went home, Damien and Yvette were renting an apartment in the city. Esteban and Narita were staying with her parents. I was alone in the big house, alone for the first time in 30 years. Ruben was always there, working in the fields, tinkering with machinery in the barn, or sitting on the veranda, discussing tomorrow's plans. I walked through the rooms, remembering. Here, in the living room, we used to celebrate New Year's Eve as a family when the boys were little. In the bedroom, Ruben had the flu 3 years ago, and I'd bring him soup in bed and give him medicine. In the kitchen, we drank coffee every morning and talked business. He would tell me what he planned to do in the field, what equipment needed to be fixed. I would tell him who to contact, who to sell what to, how much money was expected to come in. Now all of that was a thing of the past. The house was the same, but its raison d'être had changed. It had gone from being the center of a farming community to a place where a widow was living out her days. The next day, the boys arrived early, at 7 in the morning. They brought their wives and some papers. Yvette laid out folders of documents on the kitchen table. She must have spent the night studying our affairs. We've analyzed all the financial statements, she announced. And we realized we need to make some changes. Some customers are paying too little, others are dragging their feet. This Gerardo Morales, for example, Esteban added, showing the contract. He buys grain 20% above the market price. Suspicious. Morales pays well because we've been supplying him with quality grain for 5 years, I explained. He knows he can trust us, but he can delay payment for a month or 2 if he has problems with his customers. So he's unreliable, Yvette concluded. It's better to work with trusted people who pay on time. Proven people are Morales, I insisted. And Cortez and Martinez. I know them all personally. I know their families, their problems. Mom, don't worry. Damien patted me on the shoulder. We've thought of everything. We'll work with new customers, expand the market. Narita nodded in support. Yes, we need to think bigger. Esteban has already found through the internet several wholesale companies in the capital. They're willing to buy large quantities. I wanted to explain that wholesalers in the capital often cheat farmers, demand huge quantities, and then find quality problems and lower the price. Or they refuse to make a deal at the last moment, when the goods are ready for shipment. But I wasn't allowed to speak. Yvette was already laying out new contracts, and Esteban was talking about the prospects for exports to neighboring countries. Look at the possibilities, he said, showing me printouts from internet sites. Guatemala is ready to buy corn for $8 a bag. That's twice what Martinez is paying. And who will handle the export paperwork? I asked. You need quality certificates, customs declarations, licenses. We'll figure it out, Damien said. Everything is on the internet. They were so sure of themselves, so full of plans, and so indifferent to my opinion. I realized my time was up. The farm that had been my life for 30 years now belonged to other people. The first week after the funeral passed in relative peace. Damien and Esteban came to the farm every day, checking out the fields, sorting out the machinery. I cooked them lunch, and we ate together on the veranda, discussing current affairs. So far, everything went peacefully. The boys listened to my advice, asked questions about the intricacies of the farm. But on Monday of the second week, the atmosphere changed. Damien arrived not alone, but with Yvette. She was dressed in a business-like manner, a strict suit, a folder with documents in her hands. She sat at a table on the veranda and laid out her papers. Amelia, we need to have a serious talk about running the business, she said without preamble. We've looked at all the accounts for the last 3 years and found a lot of inefficiencies. I poured coffee for everyone and sat down across from her. Damien looked a little uncomfortable. Apparently his wife had convinced him that this conversation was necessary. For example, Yvette continued, You sell corn to Martinez for 250 pesos a bag, even though the market price is 300 pesos. That's a direct loss. Martinez has been buying from us for 10 years, I explained. He takes large quantities, pays in cash, and he's never picky about quality. But we lose 50 pesos on every bag, Yvette insisted. In a year, that's thousands of pesos in lost profits. But we're assured of sales, and if we look for new buyers, we could end up with a crop on our hands. Damien coughed. Mom, Yvette's right. We need to increase our profitability. We have families now, plans for the future. I looked at my son. He'd married Yvette 2 years ago, and he'd changed gradually since then. He used to trust my experience, but now he was more and more referring to his wife's opinion. Good, I agreed. But you have to be careful with new clients. Not all of them are honest. Speaking of clients, Yvette pulled out another document. This Gerardo Morales is questionable. He buys grain at an inflated price, but he's late on payments. He called yesterday, offering to buy all the remaining corn for 400 pesos a bag. I got suspicious. 400 pesos is a very good price indeed, but with Morales you had to be careful. Morales pays well, but not always on time, I warned. Last year he was 2 months late, said his buyer had bank problems. But he paid in the end? Damien clarified. Yes, he did, even with interest on the late payment. Then what was the problem? Yvette wondered. If a man eventually pays up, he is a normal partner. The problem is that we could be left without money for seeds for the next season, I explained. Or we might not be able to pay for fuel, fertilizer on time. Yvette shrugged. It's all solvable. We can take a short-term loan from the bank against the crop. I wanted to argue that loans are always a risk, that banks can raise interest rates or demand early repayment. But I realized it was useless. Yvette worked in a bank and considered herself an expert in financial matters. On Wednesday, Esteban arrived with Narita. The younger son was in good spirits. He had gotten a pay raise at the farm store and had been made a senior salesman. Narita was also glowing with happiness. Her salon had more customers and was doing well. Mom, I have great news, Esteban said over lunch. I found a company on the internet in the capital that buys organic produce. They are willing to pay 50% more than the market. But we have conventional produce, not organic, I pointed out. What's stopping you from getting a certificate? Narita intervened. Everyone is buying organic now. It is very fashionable. To get the certificate, you need 3 years without using chemical fertilizers and pesticides, I explained. The yield will drop by half. But the price will increase by 1.5, Esteban insisted. In the end, it would be profitable. And if it doesn't? If the crop dies of pests or disease? Narita rolled her eyes. Amelia, you're being too cautious. You need to keep up with the times, not cling to the old ways. I felt a pang of irritation. This girl was a hairdresser. What could she possibly know about farming? The old ways allowed us to feed our family for 30 years and save up for this land, I said calmly. Yes, but times have changed, Narita argued. We have to think bigger now. Esteban has so many ideas, so many plans, and you keep saying it's dangerous, that it won't work. I'm talking about the real risks. No, you just don't want us to make our own decisions. Narita raised her voice. You want husbands to spend their lives asking your permission. Esteban put his hand on his wife's shoulder. Narita, calm down. Mom is just worried about us. I understand that she's worried, Narita said in a quieter voice, but there was discontent in her voice. But men have to take care of men's business, and women should take care of their homes, their children, their beauty. After they left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, thinking about what had happened. The daughters-in-law were gradually turning my sons against me. They did it carefully, not openly, but persistently. Yvette used a business approach, referring to figures, efficiency, modern business methods. Narita acted through emotion, saying that men should be independent, that I was overprotective of them. On Thursday, Damien called to say that he had made a deal with Morales to sell all the remaining corn. The deal is for 200,000 pesos, very good money. Mom, you were right about the price, he said cheerfully over the phone. Morales is really paying well. He's coming tomorrow with the money. I wanted to warn him again, to remind him about possible delays in payment, but I realized it was useless. The decision had already been made. On Friday, Paloma came for lunch. My friend immediately noticed my depressed mood. "What happened?" she asked, stirring the soup. "The boys made a deal with Morales. They sold him all the corn." "What's wrong with that? Morales seems reliable." "He's reliable, but he might be late on his payments. And they got big plans. They want to expand, modernize. If Morales doesn't pay on time, they'll go into debt." Paloma nodded. She knew our family business well. We'd been friends since college when we were both studying economics. "What do the sisters-in-law say?" "Yvette thinks my experience is outdated. Narita complains that I interfere in men's affairs." "I see." Paloma put aside her spoon. "It's a familiar story. My neighbor had the same thing. The son got married, the wife began to turn him against his mother. First petty nagging, then open conflicts. And what happened? Son chose his wife. Mother sees her grandchildren once a year at Christmas." I was silent, digesting what I'd heard. Could this be my fate? "But you do not give up," continued Paloma. "Your boys are not like that. They've just been influenced. It takes time for them to realize who they really are, a friend. And if they don't? They will. Life will teach them." Damien arrived in the evening upset. Morales didn't show up with the money, citing problems at the bank. He said he'd be back on Monday. "Maybe I should have listened to my mom after all," Damien said over dinner. "It's all right," Yvette reassured him. "We'll wait until Monday. The main thing is that the price is good." But I could see the worry in my son's eyes. He was beginning to realize that running a business is not only about making a profit, but also about managing risks. Saturday, both sons arrived with their wives. They had a family council on the veranda. Yvette, as always, had a notebook and pen. "We need to discuss our development strategy," she announced. "Prioritize our priorities for the coming year." "First of all," Damien began, "we need to modernize our equipment. Our tractor is too old. The combine harvester needs to be replaced." "Secondly," Esteban added, "we should expand our range of products. Not only corn and beans, but also vegetables, maybe fruits." "Third," Narita chimed in, "we need to improve marketing, create a website, pages in social networks, attract customers through the internet." I listened and wondered. Where did they get such confidence in the correctness of their plans? They have not yet worked with the land, have not felt all the difficulties of farming. "What if Morales doesn't pay?" I asked. "He will," Yvette said. "And if he doesn't, we'll sue. It could take years. Then we take out a loan, against the land." I shuddered. To mortgage the land was to jeopardize the whole farm. "Mom, don't worry so much," Esteban said. "We've thought it over, we've calculated everything. Calculated on paper. And life often brings surprises." "What surprises?" Narita asked irritably. "Drought? Flood? There's insurance for that. Insurance doesn't cover all losses, and it doesn't pay out right away." "Amelia," Yvette said in the way one would explain something to a child, "you're thinking in terms of the last century. Modern business requires bold decisions. Bold but thoughtful." "We've thought it over," Damien insisted, "and we decided to act." Sunday passed in a tense atmosphere. Damien called Morales several times, but he didn't answer. By evening, it was clear that the money would not be received on Monday either. "Maybe we should contact the other buyers," I suggested. "No," Yvette said firmly. "We made a contract with Morales, we'll wait." "What if he doesn't pay at all?" "He will, sooner or later." That evening, Paloma came to see me again. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea and cookies. "How are things with Morales?" she asked. "He doesn't pay. He promises, but he doesn't pay." "What about the boys?" "Waiting. Yvette says modern business requires bold decisions." Paloma shook her head. "Do you know what I think? Your daughters-in-law are purposely turning your sons against your advice. They want to prove they're better at business." "Why would they do that?" "Power. Control over the family. If your advice is right, they need you, and they want to be the only counselors for their husbands. I thought about what my friend said. Indeed, Yvette and Narita acted as if they were competing with me for influence over their sons. What's your advice? Hang in there. Don't give up. Let them make mistakes. Let them realize that experience isn't nothing. And if they don't? They will, Paloma said confidently. Life is a good teacher. Only its lessons are painful. We sat up late into the night, remembering our youth, mutual acquaintances, making plans for the future. Paloma was the only person who supported me in this difficult time. Morales didn't show up for 2 weeks. Damien called him every day, but the buyer answered evasively. Then problems with the bank, or delayed documents, or illness of a relative. I could see my son was nervous, but I kept silent. Yvette was also confident, repeating that everything would be fine. The first week went relatively smoothly. We still had money left over from previous sales, enough to cover our operating expenses, but Damien had already started to worry, calling Morales several times a day, leaving messages demanding explanations. He promised to pay on Friday, his son said over breakfast on Tuesday of the second week. But Friday has passed and there is no money. Wait until Monday, Yvette advised. There might be a problem with the bank transfers. What if he doesn't pay on Monday? He will. He's got no other choice. Yvette seemed calm, but I could see her fidgeting with her pen as Damien discussed the situation with Morales. She was worried too, but she didn't want to show it to her husband. By the end of the second week, the money for running expenses was almost out. They had to pay the electricity bill, buy fuel for the machinery, and pay the workers for harvesting the crops. Damien began to show clear signs of restlessness. He slept poorly, ate little, walked around the house. Shouldn't we go to other customers? He asked Yvette over breakfast on Monday of the third week. No, his wife replied firmly. The contract is signed. Morales is obliged to pay according to the terms of the deal. But when? We can no longer wait indefinitely. Soon. I'll call him today, give him a firm ultimatum. Yvette did call Morales the same day and gave him a real beating. She was tough, businesslike, referring to the terms of the contract and threatening legal action. I listened to her conversation from the kitchen and marveled at the harshness of her tone. Morales apologized, explained the situation with problems with the main buyer in Guatemala, promised to solve the issue in the coming days. Well? Damien asked when his wife had finished talking. He promises to pay by the end of the week. He says his buyer has finally transferred the money. And you believe him? What are we supposed to do? We wait and hope. The next week, the situation deteriorated critically. Workers demanded harvest wages, the fuel supplier refused to sell on credit, and the electricity bill came due. Esteban offered to take a short-term loan from the bank, but the bank demanded guarantors or collateral. Mom, why don't you bail me out? Damien asked during a family dinner. On the security of the house. It's only temporary, a month at the most. I flatly refused. The house was the only thing I had left. I wasn't going to risk it for my son's venture. I warned you about the risks of working with Morales, I said. You didn't listen, you decided to go it alone. Yvette took my refusal very painfully. Amelia, you're a mother, she said with ill-concealed indignation. How can you not help your children in their time of need? I warned you about the potential problems. You said my experience was outdated. We made an informed business decision based on market analysis, which led to serious financial problems. Temporary difficulties, Yvette corrected. It's only a matter of time before Morales pays up. But another week passed and still no money. Damien was already openly nervous, unable to concentrate on his work. Esteban offered to break the contract with Morales and urgently sell the grain to other buyers, even at a reduced price. But Yvette stubbornly insisted on her decision. If we give up now, she explained, we will show all the partners our weakness. We have to hold out until the end. And if Morales does not pay at all? Esteban asked. He will. He has a reputation, a business. It's not good for him to mess things up. But we're already on the verge of bankruptcy. It's a temporary hardship. We need to show some character. Narita supported Yvette, though she had little understanding of the details of the situation. She liked her older daughter-in-law's determination, her unwillingness to give up under the pressure of circumstances. Yvette is right, she said. You can't show weakness in business. Men should be tough, principled. I remained silent as I watched the events unfold. I realized that the family was heading for a serious crisis, but I didn't want to interfere. Let them learn from their own mistakes. In the 5th week, the situation became critical. The electricity was cut off for non-payment, the workers threatened to go to court, suppliers refused to work without prepayment. Damien had lost weight. He looked exhausted. "Something has to be done," he told his wife after another unsuccessful call to Morales. "We can't wait any longer." "Just a little more patience," Yvette coaxed. "I have a feeling he'll pay soon." "What's that feeling based on?" "Intuition, a knowledge of human psychology." Esteban, meanwhile, had found a buyer willing to take the remaining grain for 280 pesos a sack. 30 pesos less than Morales had promised, but the money was available immediately. "Let us agree," he urged his brother. "It is better to get less, but at once, than to wait for something unknown." "No," Yvette objected. "It would be a sign of weakness. Besides, we'd lose 4,000 pesos. But we'd get 216,000 in cash. And what will Morales say when he arrives with the money and the grain is gone? We'll say he's in breach of contract, and we'll ruin the relationship forever." In the 6th week, Morales finally showed up. He arrived early Tuesday morning, accompanied by his assistant and driver, bringing a metal suitcase full of cash. He looked tired and guilty, but he brought all the money, 200,000 pesos, according to the contract, plus 10,000 in compensation for late payment. "Sorry for the delay," he said, pulling out neat bundles of bills from his suitcase. "Serious problems with a partner in Guatemala." He delayed payment for a month. There was nothing I could do. Damien counted the money twice, authenticating several bills. The amount matched perfectly. Morales signed for the goods, apologized again, shook hands, and left with his assistants. "Well, Mom," said Damien, when Morales's car disappeared behind the gate, "are you happy now?" Morales paid, and with compensation for late fees. I didn't say anything. Yes, Morales paid, but for a month and a half we lived in constant tension, could not plan expenses, almost got into serious debt. In addition, the family's reputation was damaged. Suppliers and workers now knew about our financial problems. Yvette was delighted with the successful completion of the operation. "You see, Damien, how important it is to keep your word and not panic," she said, counting the money for the 3rd time. "We have shown restraint, integrity, and have made an extra profit." "You're absolutely right," agreed the son. "Your strategy was completely correct." Esteban also praised his brother and sister-in-law for their firmness of character and business acumen. So the delay in payment had turned into a triumphant victory for them, and my warnings about the risks into a display of excessive caution and mistrust of the younger generation. "Now we know that we can handle any difficulty," Yvette announced triumphantly. "The main thing is not to lose faith in ourselves and not to listen to pessimists." Narita nodded admiringly, supporting every word of her elder sister-in-law. A few days later, Yvette announced her grand decision. "We need to celebrate the successful completion of this complicated transaction," she said at a family dinner on Sunday. "We'll have a big party, invite friends, neighbors, business partners." "That's a great idea," Damien said enthusiastically. "We'll show everyone that we're doing great, that we know how to solve problems. And we'll meet new people," Esteban added. "Maybe we'll find favorable partners for future deals." Narita clapped her hands with delight. "How wonderful! I love big parties so much. We could invite all the girls from the salon, their boyfriends, their acquaintances." "Of course," Yvette agreed generously. "The more people, the better the atmosphere." They began to make a list of potential guests at the table. The number was impressive. About 70 people, friends and girlfriends of daughters-in-law, neighbors, farmers, work colleagues, Narita's clients from the hair salon, Yvette's acquaintances from the banking industry. "Where exactly to hold the party?" Esteban asked practically. "Of course, here in our house," answered Yvette without hesitation. "The house is big. There is a spacious veranda, a nice yard, a perfect place for a party." I listened to their plans with growing concern. 70 people in our house is a real crowd of strangers, inevitable noise, dirt, possible problems with neighbors. Wouldn't it be better to rent a cafe or restaurant in town? I cautiously suggested. There is everything you need for big events. Why spend extra money? Yvette was genuinely surprised. We have a beautiful, spacious house, but so many guests in a private house? We can manage easily, Narita said. The main thing is to organize everything well in advance. I can help with the organization, I offered. I have experience in organizing large family events. Yvette and Narita looked at each other meaningfully. Thank you, Amelia, but we'll be fine on our own, Yvette said coldly. We have plenty of experience in organizing festivities. Yes, Narita said hastily. I organize parties for the salon girls all the time, and Yvette organized corporate events at the bank. But I know all the peculiarities of our house, I insisted. For example, the old electrical wiring may not be able to handle the heavy load of the music equipment. We'll be sure to take all the technical details into account, Yvette replied formally. Don't worry about it. In the following days, the daughters-in-law actively and energetically prepared for the upcoming party. They ordered a variety of food in a good restaurant, a large number of drinks in a specialized store, professional music equipment in a rental company. We hung brightly colored garlands all over the house, set up extra tables and chairs in the yard and on the porch. I offered several times to help with the preparations, but they invariably politely declined. They said that they had everything well planned and under full control, that it was better for me to just rest before the big party. The day before the party, Paloma arrived. After hearing about the grand plans, she sincerely offered to help prepare additional appetizers and traditional dishes. I have time-tested recipes for large parties, she told Yvette. I can make great tapas, enchiladas, guacamole. Thank you very much, but we've already ordered everything from the restaurant, Yvette replied politely but firmly. Professional chefs will bring fully prepared food. But home-cooked food is always better and heartier than restaurant food, Paloma insisted. We don't want to jeopardize the quality of the food, Narita interjected coldly. Restaurant food is 100% guarantee of high quality and safety. Paloma was clearly offended by this disregard for her proposal and went home much earlier than usual. They deliberately and systematically remove you from all cases, she said to me goodbye, standing in front of the car. They want to show everyone that they can do without your help and advice. The party started at 7 o'clock on Saturday night. First to arrive were Yvette's elegant young colleagues from the bank, smartly dressed girls and presentable guys in expensive business suits. Then Narita's numerous clients and their noisy companions arrived. By 8 o'clock in the evening, the spacious courtyard was completely filled with various cars, and the house was filled with people having fun. The music was playing very loudly, modern popular songs that I did not know at all. The young guests were actively dancing on the veranda, where Ruben and I used to sit quietly on quiet evenings. In the large living room organized a sumptuous buffet table with delicious snacks and a variety of drinks. By 10 o'clock in the evening, the party was finally out of control. The alcohol had done its work. The guests' voices became louder and sharper, their laughter more hysterical, and their behavior more and more licentious. Several young men from Yvette's company of bank employees were openly smoking right in the living room, despite my request to go outside. I stood in the corner and watched the chaos in my house. A girl from Narita's salon had spilled a whole glass of red wine on the white couch Ruben and I had bought 5 years ago for our silver wedding. The wine soaked into the fabric, leaving an ugly, dark maroon stain. "Oh, I'm sorry," the culprit said, staggering from the drink. "It was an accident." I rushed to the couch with a towel, trying to clean the stain before it dried up completely. "It's no big deal," Narita said nonchalantly as I tried to save the furniture. "After the party, we'll clean it all up. The main thing now is to have fun." Meanwhile, the kitchen was a disaster of its own. A group of tipsy guests staged an impromptu appetizer-throwing contest, and several plates shattered on the tiled floor. The shards scattered all over the kitchen, but no one was in a hurry to clean them up. "Hey, watch it!" I shouted as I entered the kitchen. "There are splinters in here. You could get hurt." "Relax, Auntie," said one of the guys, clearly drunk. "It's a party, not a funeral." His companions laughed out loud at the joke. I cringed at the comparison. Ruben's funeral was only 2 months ago, and it seemed particularly inappropriate. The toilet on the first floor was clogged. Apparently someone had thrown something inappropriate in there. Water began to overflow, flooding the tiled floor. I tried to find the culprit, but all the guests just shrugged their shoulders and wrung their hands. By 11 o'clock, the situation had become quite critical. Someone had turned the music system up to maximum volume, and the sound was deafening. Neighbors had already called twice to complain about the noise, threatening to call the police. But the youths paid no attention. On the veranda, a group of particularly rowdy guests began to play an active game, during which they knocked over 2 chairs and broke the leg of a small table. This table was also memorable. Reuben had made it with his own hands during our first year together. "Stop that right now." I couldn't stand it, coming up to the merry group. "You're breaking furniture." "Come on," one of the guys said. "It's just an old table. Damien's rich, he'll buy a new one." "This table was made by my late husband," I said, trying to stay calm. "It's as dear to me as a memory." "So what?" drunkenly giggled some girl. "The dead don't take offense." That phrase was the last straw. I felt my anger boiling up inside me. But before I could say anything, Yvette came up to me. "Amelia, what's the matter?" she asked with a noticeable irritation in her voice. "Why are you yelling at our guests?" "They are breaking furniture, littering, behaving inappropriately," I explained. "It's just young people having fun," Yvette replied coldly. "Nothing extraordinary. But they broke plates in the kitchen, broke the table Reuben had made." "Amelia," Yvette said in that tone one uses with cranky children, "you're spoiling the mood with your complaints. It's a holiday, people are having fun." "They're having fun at the expense of destroying my house." "Your house?" Yvette raised an eyebrow. "As I recall, it belongs to Damien and Esteban." That phrase hit me like a slap in the face. Technically, Yvette was right. According to the will, I only had the right to live in the house for life, but my sons were the owners. Meanwhile, Narita came over to us, also clearly unhappy with my behavior. "Amelia, what's going on? The guests complain that you're always making remarks to them. I'm trying to keep the house from collapsing." "The house is strong enough for one party," Narita said nonchalantly, "but you're ruining the party atmosphere." "I'm just asking the guests to behave themselves." "You're acting like a grumpy old woman," Narita said bluntly, "always dissatisfied with everything, complaining about everything." "Narita is right," Yvette said. "You're turning a happy holiday into a nightmare with your endless complaints." I felt utterly helpless. My own house was being destroyed before my eyes, and my sisters-in-law were accusing me of interfering with the fun. At that moment, Damien came up to me. I could tell from his flushed face and unsteady gait that he'd had a lot to drink, too. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked. "Yvette says you're clashing with the guests." "I'm not being confrontational, I'm trying to protect our house from vandalism." "What vandalism?" The son was surprised. "People are just having fun. They broke the table your father made, they broke plates, they flooded the toilet, they stained the couch. So what? It can all be fixed, you can buy a new one. Your father's table can't be bought at the store." "Mom, don't make a big deal out of it," Damien said in a conciliatory tone, but I could hear the irritation in his voice. "One night, one party. Can't you be patient?" Esteban joined us, also drunk and clearly disgruntled. "Mom, the guests are complaining that you're bothering them with your complaints," he said without preamble. "I'm protecting our home." "Protecting you from what? From funny people? From destruction." "Narita is right," Esteban shook his head. "You're acting like an old grouch. My youngest son's words hurt me. I've seen how my wives have turned my boys against me." "Amelia," Yvette intervened, "perhaps you should go to your room. Get some rest while we entertain the guests. This is my home, and I have a right to be anywhere." "Technically, it's your son's home," Yvette reminded him, "and they ask you not to interfere with the party." "Yes, Mom," said Damien. "Go get some rest while we have some fun with our friends." "I'm not going to hide in my room while my house is in chaos." "Then maybe we should just leave the house temporarily." Narita suggested it. "Take a walk, get some fresh air." "Why would I leave my own house?" "Not to spoil people's moods," she answered honestly. I realized that further conversation was useless. The sons had completely taken their wives' side, and the guests looked at me as a hindrance to their fun. "You know what?" Damien said, clearly having made up his mind. "Let's go, Mom. We need to have a serious talk." He took me under his arm, and I felt his grip on me was pretty firm. Esteban came up on the other side. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To the garage," Damien answered. "It's quieter there, so we can talk." We walked through the courtyard, where the guests were still partying noisily, to the garage. It was a separate structure that Reuben had built to store farm equipment and tools. "Well, Mom," Damien said once we were inside the garage, "let's make a deal. The party will last a couple more hours, then everyone will leave." "What do you suggest?" "Sit here until the guests leave. Read a book, get away from the noise. In the garage? It's nice and quiet. Just what you need." I was about to object, but Damian was on his way out. Esteban followed him. "What are you boys doing?" I shouted after them. "Protecting your nerves," Esteban answered. They left the garage and I heard the lock click outside. At first I didn't believe they'd actually locked me in. I went to the door, pulled the handle, and it wouldn't open. "Damien! Esteban!" I shouted. "Open up at once!" But there was no answer. Only distant voices and laughter could be heard. I was alone in the dark garage. The only light came through a small window in the ceiling. It smelled of machine oil, gasoline, and old hay. There were tools, parts, and fuel cans in the corners. At first, I kept banging on the door and screaming, demanding to be released. But soon I realized it was useless. The music in the house was playing so loudly that my screams were lost in the noise. After a while, I heard Yvette's voice coming from the yard. She was speaking loudly, addressing the guests. "At last we're rid of that old grump. Now we can have fun in peace without constant complaining and whining." The guests laughed. Someone even clapped his hands. Apparently, my absence pleased many people. "She was always dissatisfied with everything," Yvette continued. "The music was loud, the furniture was broken, or something else was wrong." "Old people are always like that," answered a man's voice. "Any kind of fun disturbs them." "We are the owners of this house now," Narita added, "and we will live as we see fit." As I listened to these conversations, I felt not only resentment rising inside me, but real anger. I was locked in the garage like a useless thing, and my sisters-in-law were openly rejoicing in my absence. I sat down on an old wooden crate and tried to calm down. I needed to think about how to get out of here. The door was padlocked from the outside, the window too small and high. It seemed like I was really trapped. But then, I remembered something important. Years ago, when Reuben had first built this garage, he had made a secret passage in it. It had seemed like an odd quirk at the time, but now I realized how forward-thinking he'd been. The passageway was behind a tall metal tool rack in the far corner of the garage. Reuben had made it to store especially valuable tools and important documents. He had a small safe there where he put money and papers. I got up from the crate and headed toward the rack. It was hard to see the details in the semi-darkness, but I remembered the location of the aisle. I had to push the rack to the side. It was on special casters that made it easy to move. It was heavier than I remembered, but I managed to move it about half a meter. Behind it was a small door built into the wall at floor level. The door was locked, but the key was hanging on a nail nearby, typical Rubenesque practicality. I opened the door and looked inside. The passage was rather narrow, but enough to crawl through. It led underground to the basement of the house. Reuben had designed it as an emergency exit in case of any emergencies. It wasn't easy to crawl through the narrow tunnel. They had to move on all fours, in total darkness, navigating only by feel. The tunnel was dry, but it smelled of earth and stale air. After about 10 meters, I came across another door. This door opened from the inside with a simple latch. Behind it was the basement of our house, a small room under the kitchen where we kept canned goods and vegetables. I climbed out of the tunnel, shaking the dust and dirt from my clothes. There was a narrow staircase leading up from the basement that ended in a hatch in the kitchen floor. The hatch was disguised as an ordinary floorboard, and few people knew of its existence. As I climbed the stairs, I carefully opened the hatch and peered into the kitchen. Thankfully, no one was there. All the guests were partying in other parts of the house. I quietly climbed out of the basement, closed the hatch, and looked around. The kitchen was a sad sight. Broken plates, spilled drinks, leftover food on the floor, but that wasn't what I was interested in right now. I was free to act. Standing in the trashed kitchen, I felt completely clear-headed for the first time in years. The anger that had been simmering inside me all evening suddenly turned to cold determination. My sons had locked me in the garage as if I were an unwanted item. The daughters-in-law openly rejoiced at my absence, calling me an old grump. The guests were destroying the house that Reuben and I had spent 30 years building. Drunken laughter and loud music came from the living room. Someone was yelling, demanding more drinks. The glass rattled again. Something else must have broken. But I didn't care anymore. They could destroy the house as much as they wanted. It would still be standing. But the rest of the household? I walked out of the kitchen through the back door into the yard. The guests were concentrated in the front of the house, on the porch and in the living room, so no one noticed my silent figure in the darkness. The music was playing so loud it drowned out any sounds. The first thing I did was head to the shed where the gas cans for the farm equipment were stored. Reuben always kept a supply of fuel here for the tractor, the combine, the motorized cultivator. The shed was 50 meters away from the house, so it was easy to get there unnoticed. Inside the shed smelled of machine oil and fuel. On the racks were canisters of different sizes. Large 20-liter ones for the tractor, smaller ones for small equipment. I took 3 10-liter canisters, as much as I could carry at one time. There was enough gasoline for my purposes. As I left the barn with the jerry cans, I looked around the farm. The outlines of the outbuildings were clearly visible in the moonlight. To the left of the house stood a large barn with corn, tons of grain that would generate income throughout the year. To the right was a warehouse with finished produce packed in bags for sale. Farther away, a barn with farm equipment where stood a tractor, combine, cultivator, and other machines. I started at the barn. I approached the wooden wall and methodically sprayed it with gasoline from the first canister. The liquid quickly soaked into the old wood, spreading a pungent odor. I walked along the entire wall, not missing a section. The barn was big 20 meters long and 10 wide. Reuben had built it solidly with thick planks, but the wood had weakened over the years, cracks appearing. Perfect conditions for a fire to spread quickly. When I finished with the barn, I moved on to the warehouse with the finished products. There were bags of corn, beans, flour, everything ready for sale. I estimated it at about 150,000 pesos. Not a bad capital for a young family. The warehouse was built of brick, but the roof was wooden, covered with old roofing felt. I sprayed gasoline on the wooden roof supports, door, and window frames. The fire should have engulfed the entire building in minutes. The second canister was empty. I went back to the barn for more fuel. On the way, I stopped to listen to what was going on in the house. The music was still blaring. The guests were yelling and laughing. Apparently, no one had noticed my absence so far. Taking 2 more canisters, I headed for the most valuable object, the machinery shed. There were machines worth more than 300,000 pesos, a tractor that Reuben had bought 5 years ago on credit and paid off until his death, a combine that had been borrowed last year for harvesting, cultivator, planter, trailers, everything I needed for farming. Machinery was my special pride. I knew every machine, remembered when and how much it was bought, how much work it did, how much money it brought. These machines were the fruit of 30 years of labor, a symbol of our success with Reuben. But today, they were a symbol of betrayal. Damian and Esteban inherited the machinery without paying a peso for it. They immediately decided they could do without my advice, that they didn't need my expertise. I sprayed gasoline on the tractor wheels, the seat, the fuel tank. The liquid ran down the metal, collecting in puddles on the concrete floor. The combine got the same treatment. I generously poured fuel on its cab, reaper, and grain tank. The rest of the machinery was smaller, but I didn't neglect it either. Cultivator, planter, 2 trailers, motorized cultivator, all received their portion of gasoline. By the time I finished, the smell of fuel in the barn was so strong that it was hard to breathe. I used the last canister to fill the wooden racks with spare parts and tools. Tens of thousands of pesos worth of parts were stored here, tools that Reuben had collected over the years. All of that was going to burn too. Now we had to set it all on fire. I took a lighter out of my pocket, the old one Reuben used to light his pipe with. Symbolically, it would be the instrument of retribution. She started with the barn. I put the light to the gasoline stain on the wooden wall. The flame flared up instantly, ran through the wood with hissing and crackling. Within seconds, the entire wall was on fire, and the flames traveled upward to the roof. Inside the barn were tons of dry grain, the perfect fuel for a fire. As soon as the flames penetrated inside, a deafening rumble was heard. It was corn catching fire. The fire began to spread with incredible speed. I ran aside and headed for the warehouse with finished products. Here, too, everything burst into flames instantly. Sacks of grain and flour created an additional draft, and the flames soared to the ceiling. In a minute, the whole warehouse was a huge torch. But the main thing was ahead, a shed with machinery. I walked over to the puddle of gasoline by the tractor and held up my lighter. The fire ran across the floor, engulfing one machine after another. Rubber tires began to melt, emitting acrid smoke. The plastic parts of the cabs were catching fire with bright flames. When the tractor's fuel tank caught fire, there was a small explosion. Nothing dangerous, just gasoline vapors ignited all at once. But the sound was loud enough to attract attention. I quickly left the barn and headed for the fence separating our farm from the neighboring one. From there, I had a clear view of what was happening, but I stayed in the shadows. The fire was growing at an alarming rate. 3 large flames were lighting up the whole farm with a bright orange light. The barn was already burning completely. The roof was failing and the walls were beginning to crumble. The produce warehouse was also a pile of flaming debris. The machinery shed was burning especially spectacularly. Tires were exploding, metal was melting, black smoke was rising high into the sky. It was the smoke that attracted the attention of the merrymaking guests. First, someone shouted from the veranda, then the music abruptly stopped. People were rushing out of the house, pointing their hands at the fire, shouting to each other. Damien was the first to appear. He jumped out of the house, staggering from the drink, and stopped like a stump when he saw the burning buildings. Esteban ran out after him, followed by Yvette and Nareda. "What's that?" Damien shouted, wiping his eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "What's happening?" "A fire!" Nareda shrieked. "Everything is on fire!" Esteban rushed toward the machinery shed, but the heat was so intense that it was impossible to get close. He stopped 10 meters away from the burning building, covering his face with his hands. "Tractor!" he shouted. "Combine! All the machines are on fire!" Yvette stood silent, eyes wide open. Apparently, her business mind was quickly calculating the losses. The guests also poured into the yard, but stayed away from the fire, watching more out of curiosity than anything else. "We must call the fire brigade!" Damien shouted, grabbing the phone. "It's too late," said one of the guests. "By the time they arrive, everything will be burned out." Indeed, the fire had reached such an intensity that it was impossible to stop it. The flames were rising tens of meters high. The crackling of burning wood and metal could be heard all around. A grain barn. Esteban walked closer to the place where the building with tons of corn had stood in the morning. Now it was just a pile of smoldering embers and mangled metal. There was grain there for 6 months' sales. "And the warehouse with the finished product," Yvette added in a gray voice. 150,000 pesos, just burned down. Damien was silent, staring at the blazing machinery shed. I knew what he was thinking. There were over 300,000 pesos worth of machinery burning. Everything his father had left behind, everything they had counted on for the future. How could this have happened? Esteban asked, confused. 3 buildings at once. "Arson," said briefly one of the neighbors who came running to the fire. "It doesn't burn like that by accident." "Arson?" Damien interjected. "Who could—" He didn't finish, but I saw a look of understanding in his eyes. Esteban looked at his brother with a meaningful look too. "Mom," Damian said. "Where's Mom?" "In the garage," Yvette answered. "We put her there." She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. Damien rushed to the garage, Esteban behind him. A minute later, they returned with shocked faces. "There's no one in there," Damien said. "The lock is intact, but the inside is empty." "How could she have gotten out?" Narita wondered. "I don't know, but she got out," said Esteban grimly, "and apparently decided to take revenge on us. By this time, the firemen had arrived. but there was nothing left for them to do. The fire had begun to die down on its own, as they were running out of combustible materials. Only smoking ruins and mangled metal remained. The fire chief, a fat man in a dirty uniform, approached Damien. "Are you the owner?" he asked. "Yes," Damien replied hoarsely. "Arson, pure arson. 3 buildings at once at different ends of the yard. You see the smell of gasoline?" "I do." Damien nodded. "We'll draw up a report. Call the investigators. Do you have any suspicions about who might have done it?" Damien was silent. Esteban was also silent. Yvette and Nareda looked at each other but said nothing. "Think about it," said the fireman. "Tomorrow the police will come. They will ask questions." When the firemen left, only the family and a few particularly curious guests remained at the farm. The rest of the party was clearly over. Yvette stood among the smoking ruins and counted the losses aloud. The grain barn, 80,000 pesos. The warehouse with products, 150,000. Machinery, 350,000. 580,000 pesos. "Almost 600,000, Esteban said. "Plus tools, spare parts." "Will the insurance cover it?" Nareda asked. "What insurance?" Damien laughed bitterly. "We were going to take it out, but we didn't have time." "So we won't get anything back?" "Nothing." There was a heavy silence. Everyone realized the scale of the catastrophe. In one night, the family lost everything: crops, machinery, means of production. Only the house and the land without tools for its cultivation remained. "What to do now?" Esteban asked quietly. "I don't know," Damien answered honestly. "I don't know at all." Meanwhile, I was walking down the dark road toward Paloma's house. Behind me were the smoking ruins, the screams and lamentations. Ahead was the peace and understanding of the only person who supported me. Paloma lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, a 10-minute walk from our farm. When I knocked on the door, it was past midnight. "Amelia?" My friend answered the door in surprise. "What's wrong? Why are you dressed like that?" I looked at myself in the mirror in the hallway. My clothes were dirty from crawling through the tunnel, my hair disheveled, my face sooty from the smoke. "Can I come in?" I asked. Long story. We sat down in the kitchen, Paloma putting the kettle on. Through the window, I could see a red streak on the horizon. It was the remains of my farm burning down. "Is that a fire on your farm?" Paloma asked, noticing the flames. "Yes," I answered briefly. "The barns, warehouses, and machinery burned." "Oh my God, what about—" "My sons locked me in the garage," I interrupted. "Said that I spoil their holiday." Paloma silently poured tea, waiting for the continuation. "Yvette shouted to the guests that finally got rid of the old nag," I continued. "And then I remembered the secret passage that Reuben had made." "What did you do?" I looked my friend in the eye. "What they deserved," I said calmly. Paloma nodded, not asking any more questions. She understood me without further ado. We sat drinking tea in silence, staring out the window at the red glow. Somewhere out there, my sons stood amidst the ruins and realized that they were left without a livelihood. Home was the only thing they had now. The house where their mother lived, the one they had just betrayed.